Most people believe that if you didn't start playing poker in your 20s, you're already behind. That the game belongs to the young, the fast, the fearless, players who grew up grinding online, memorizing solvers, running GTO ranges before breakfast. That if you're over 40 and still trying to improve, you're fighting a battle you can't win. But I'm going to tell you something today that most players never figure out. Something that changed the way I see this game. And the way I see myself at the table. Poker is one of the only competitive games on earth where your edge can actually grow with age. Not shrink, not decline, grow. And not because the game gets easier, it doesn't. But because the skills that make someone truly dangerous at a poker table have almost nothing to do with reaction speed or hours logged online. They have everything to do with something that only comes with time, with failure, with hard lessons learned and wisdom earned at real cost. If you're over 40 and you're watching this, I need you to hear this clearly. You may already have advantages that younger players are still desperately trying to develop. Advantages that no training site can teach, no solver can calculate, no amount of volume can manufacture. This video is called Mind of a Grinder for a reason. Because a grinder isn't just someone who plays a lot of hands. A grinder is someone who thinks deeply, studies honestly, adapts constantly, and shows up again and again no matter what the last session looked like. That's you. That's why you're here. And by the time this video is over, you are going to see this game differently. We're going to break down the real advantages of being an experienced player. We're going to go deep into some of the most powerful strategies in modern poker, including the squeeze play, range thinking, fold equity, and how to exploit loose players in ways that actually work. We're going to look at the legends of this game who prove that poker excellence has no expiration date. And we're going to build a roadmap for how you can get dramatically better, right now, even with limited time to study. Stay with me from start to finish. Because the concept I'm going to share at the very end of this video might be the most important idea in poker that almost nobody talks about. Let me paint you a picture. You sit down at a live poker table. To your left is a 26-year-old wearing headphones, staring at the felt, not making eye contact with anyone. He plays fast. He's probably solid. But here's what he doesn't know yet. He's never been truly broke. He's never had to make a decision at the table, knowing that the wrong move means the rent doesn't get paid. He's never sat across from a man who is clearly on tilt and had the discipline to simply wait, patiently, without feeling the urge to pounce too early. You have. And that changes everything. There's a concept in behavioral economics called hot-cold empathy gaps. It describes how badly humans underestimate how strongly emotions will affect their decisions in the heat of the moment. Young poker players, even the brilliant ones, consistently fall into this trap. They play great poker for 6 hours and then lose 3 buy-ins in 20 minutes when things go sideways. Not because they don't know the right play, but because knowing and doing are two completely different things when the pressure is real. People over 40 have generally developed what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to feel an intense emotion without being controlled by it. You know what frustration feels like. You know what loss feels like. You've sat with discomfort long enough to understand that it passes. And in poker, that understanding is worth more than almost any technical skill. Think about the greatest cash game players in history. Doyle Brunson played elite poker well into his 80s. Not because he was running the newest GTO software at 80 years old, but because he understood people at a level that took decades to develop. He knew when a man was bluffing before the man knew he was bluffing. He could sit stone still for 3 hours and then pick the perfect moment to strike. That patience, that presence, is a product of lived experience. Eric Seidel won his 10th WSOP bracelet at 64 years old, in a super high roller event, competing against the sharpest mathematical minds in the modern game. Think about that. At 64, at a $50,000 buy-in, against players who eat solver output for breakfast. He won. Because adaptability, reading people, emotional steadiness, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure do not disappear at 40. They deepen. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. In live poker, which is where most recreational players and improving players compete, the psychological edge matters far more than it does online. You are not playing against a computer. You are playing against humans. And reading humans is something that gets better, not worse, with time. But here's where most players over 40 make a critical mistake. They think their age is holding them back. They look at the young player across the table running bluffs and three-betting light, and they feel like they're playing catch-up. They're not. They're playing a different game, a better game. And they just don't know it yet. Let's talk about something that sounds boring but is actually one of the most powerful strategic weapons in poker. Patience. Real, deep, deliberate patience. Not the kind where you're just folding and waiting for aces, a specific, intentional form of patience that most younger players are incapable of maintaining for more than about 90 minutes. Here's what strategic patience actually looks like at the table. You sit down. You observe. You don't play a hand for the first 30 to 45 minutes. You are building a database. Who raises pre-flop with weak hands? Who calls too much? Who barrels bluffs on the turn but folds to river raises? Who is steaming from the last hand? Who is distracted by their phone? Who checks their whole cards twice before acting? All of this information, and I mean all of it, is worth money. Real money. Here's a hand example. You've been at the table for 40 minutes. You've played 4 hands. You've been watching one particular player. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus is a classic recreational player. He limps pre-flop frequently, calls too often, and you've seen him check call 2 streets with middle pair before folding the river twice. He hates confrontation. He's not a bad player, but he's passive, and he overvalues made hands. Now you pick up ace-jack suited in the cutoff. Marcus limps from middle position. Everyone folds to you. What does a patient, experienced player do here? You don't just raise a standard 3 times and move on. You raise to 4.5 times the big blind, a slightly larger sizing than normal, because you know Marcus will call with a wide range, but he won't re-raise without the absolute top of his range. You're building a pot with a hand that has both strong high card value and flush potential. You have position on him, and you've already done the homework on how he plays post-flop. The flop comes jack, 7, 3 with 2 suits. You have top pair, top kicker. Marcus checks. You bet 60% of the pot. Marcus calls. The turn brings a complete blank. Marcus checks again. Here's the moment of truth. A younger, impatient player might check back here, protecting their hand, avoiding risk. But you've watched Marcus play. He doesn't like the river. He folds to river bets when he doesn't have a strong hand. So you bet 70% of the pot on the turn. Marcus thinks for about 20 seconds and folds. You never even had to see the river card. That's patience converted into money. You didn't just wait for good cards. You waited, watched, built a profile, and then executed a plan that was already mostly written before the hand began. That's what discipline actually looks like in practice. Younger players often mistake patience for weakness. Let them. Every time they underestimate the quiet player in the corner who hasn't played a hand in an hour, they are writing a check they don't know they're writing. All right. Let's get into the technical heart of this video. I want to teach you one of the most powerful plays in live poker, and I want to explain it so clearly that even if you've never heard the term before, you will walk away ready to use it. It's called the squeeze play. And if you play live poker at any level, from small cash games to mid-stakes tournaments, this move is one of the highest profit plays you can add to your game starting today. So what is a squeeze? Here's the simple definition. A squeeze is when you make a big re-raise pre-flop after there has been one player who raised and at least one other player who called that raise. Someone raises, someone else calls, and then you come in with a massive 3-bet. You are squeezing the first 2 players between you and the pot. Now, why is this so powerful? There are 3 reasons that stack on top of each other and create a perfect storm of leverage. Reason 1. There is dead money in the pot. The caller, the player who just called the original raise, has already put chips in. When you squeeze, those chips don't come back to them. That money stays in the middle and belongs to whoever wins the pot. By squeezing, you're fighting for money that's already committed by a player who might not even continue. Reason 2. The caller's range is capped. This is crucial. Think about it. If the caller had a monster hand like aces, kings, or ace-king, they almost certainly would have raised, not called. The fact that they called tells you something very important. They probably don't have a premium hand. the ceiling of what they're likely holding. Reason 3. The original raiser is now squeezed between two opponents. Even if they have a decent hand, they have to be worried about both the caller behind them and your massive re-raise. The pressure on both players is enormous. Let me show you exactly how this plays out. You're in a live cash game. You are on the button with ace-king of spades, one of the best starting hands in poker. Under the gun, a player who we've identified as loose aggressive raises. He's been opening wide, maybe 25 to 30% of hands. A player in middle position calls. He's a passive recreational player, the type who calls a lot and folds to pressure. Now it folds to you on the button. This is a perfect squeeze spot. The loose raiser has a wide range, lots of medium pairs, Broadway hands, suited connectors. The caller is capped, probably has a hand like pocket sevens, pocket eights, suited connectors, or Broadway hands that didn't want to re-raise. Neither of them is likely to have a hand strong enough to call a big 3-bet comfortably. You raise to roughly 4 times the original raise. Now watch what happens. The original raiser looks at his hand. He has Jack 10 of diamonds, a hand he felt good about opening, but now he has to call significantly more into a pot where there's already pressure behind him. He knows the player in middle position is still to act. He folds. The middle position player looks at his pocket sevens. Not terrible, but he's now getting squeezed by someone who could easily have aces, kings, or ace-king. He folds. You pick up the pot without ever seeing a flop. But what if one of them calls? This is where having ace-king suited is beautiful. You have the best possible hand to squeeze with. Premium card strength plus huge equity if you get called. If the flop comes with an ace, you continue betting with top pair, top kicker, and likely win a big pot. If you miss the flop completely, you can often still take it down with a well-sized continuation bet against a player who is out of position and uncertain. And here's the advanced layer that most players never reach. The squeeze doesn't only work with premium hands. Once you've established the play, once players at your table have seen you squeeze a couple of times, you can begin squeezing with semi-bluff hands. Hands that have equity when called but also high fold equity against unprepared opponents. The key is using the right sizing, picking the right spots, and doing it with a mix of strong hands and well-chosen semi-bluffs so you become very hard to read. Let me ask you a question. If you could see your opponent's cards before you had to act, how much better would you play? Obviously dramatically better. You'd know exactly when to bet, when to call, when to fold. Well, position is the next best thing to seeing your opponent's cards, because when you act last, you get to see their decision before you make yours. And that information is enormously valuable. But here's what most players don't fully understand. Position is not just about where you sit. It's about how consistently you use your positional advantage to put maximum pressure on your opponents throughout an entire hand, from pre-flop decisions all the way to the river. When you have position on an opponent, meaning you act after them on every street, you gain 3 specific edges. First, information. They act first, which tells you something about their hand strength. A check often signals weakness. A bet signals confidence. Their timing and bet sizing give you data before you have to commit a single chip. Second, control. You decide whether the pot stays small or gets big. If you have a strong hand and they check, you bet and build the pot. If you have a mediocre hand and they check, you can check back and see a free card. Third, bluffing efficiency. Bluffs and semi-bluffs work at a much higher success rate when you have position because you get the last say, and your bet forces a decision from someone who has already shown weakness. Here's a practical hand that shows position used to near perfection. You're on the button in a tournament. A middle position player raises. He's been playing solidly but somewhat predictably. He tends to continuation bet the flop, then slow down on turns when he doesn't improve. You call with 9-8 suited. The big blind folds. The flop comes king, 6-2 with a heart flush draw. Your opponent bets half the pot. You call because your flush draw has enough equity to continue and because you want to see what the turn brings while you maintain position. The turn is a blank. Your opponent checks. That check is a sign of weakness. He was hoping for a call on the flop, and when the turn came a non-threatening card, he pumped the brakes. You bet 65% of the pot. He thinks for a long time and folds, muttering something about not wanting to play a big pot with one pair. You never hit your flush. You never needed to. Position turned a speculative hand into a profitable bluff. That's the real power of acting last. You get information, then you use that information as a weapon. For older players, position is especially powerful because you have the patience to wait for positional advantages. You don't force hands out of position. You don't call raises from the blinds with marginal holdings just to be involved. You choose your battles, and when you do get position, you play it for everything it's worth. Let's talk about one of the most important mental shifts in all of poker. It's a shift from a simple way of thinking to a far more powerful way of thinking, and once you make this shift, there's no going back. It's called range thinking, and it's the difference between an average player and a dangerous one. Most beginner and intermediate players think in terms of specific hands. They sit across from someone who bets big on the river and think, he has a set, I'm beat. Or, he's bluffing with nothing. They try to put their opponent on one specific hand. And that's a fundamentally broken way to analyze poker, because poker is a game of incomplete information. You almost never actually know what hand your opponent holds. What you can know, with increasing precision as your skills develop, is the range of hands they're likely to have, given their actions throughout the hand. This is range thinking. Instead of asking what hand does he have, you ask what's the full set of hands he could plausibly be playing this way, and then you figure out what the best play is against that entire range, not against one imagined hand. Let me give you a concrete example. You raise from the cutoff with pocket queens. The big blind calls. The flop comes ace, 7, 2. The big blind leads out with a bet of 60% of the pot. The simple thinker says, he bet. He probably has an ace, I fold. But the range thinker asks a different question. What's the range of hands the big blind would lead out with here? And the answer is much more nuanced. Yes, some of those hands are aces, top pair. But he might also be leading with a set of sevens, 2 pair, a straight draw, or even a complete bluff looking to take down the pot immediately. When you think in ranges, you start to see that folding pocket queens to this bet might be a significant mistake, because a huge portion of the big blind's leading range doesn't have an ace. Maybe 30 to 40% of hands he would lead here you're actually ahead of. So instead of just folding, you consider calling and reevaluating the turn, or you consider a small raise to see how he responds to pressure. Range thinking also works in reverse. You need to think about what range your actions represent to your opponents. When you raise pre-flop from early position, what range do the players at your table assign to you? If they think you only raise with premium hands, you have a tight image, and you can use that image to run well-timed bluffs. If they've seen you raise a wider range, they'll call you lighter, and you should value bet more aggressively with your strong hands. This two-way range thinking, understanding their range and being aware of the range your actions represent, is what makes poker feel like chess. You're always thinking multiple levels deep, always aware of the larger picture while managing the immediate decision in front of you. And this kind of thinking, analytical, patient, multi-layered, is something that gets stronger with practice and experience, not weaker. If you understand this idea and start applying it, you will instantly start seeing poker tables differently. Every action at the table stops being isolated and starts being a piece of information in a much larger puzzle. Let me introduce you to a concept called fold equity. It sounds technical. It's actually one of the most practical and immediately useful ideas in all of poker. And once you truly understand it, you will stop playing poker purely reactively and start playing it proactively. Fold equity is simply the value you gain when your bet or raise causes an opponent to fold. Every time you bet and your opponent folds, you win the pot immediately, regardless of what cards you actually hold. Those chips you won don't care whether you had the best hand or a total bluff. They're yours. Fold equity is the extra profit built into every aggressive action you take. Here's how it applies in real play. You're in a tournament. Blinds are escalating and you have a workable stack. You're in the small blind. Everyone folds to you. The big blind has been playing fairly tight and passive. He's folded to pressure a lot. You look down at King 4 offsuit, not a premium hand, but you have a significant fold equity opportunity here. You raise to about 2.5 times the big blind. Why? Because against a tight passive player, when you come in from the small blind with a raise, he will fold a significant percentage of the time, maybe 60 to 70%. When he folds, you pick up the blinds and antes without a fight. That's free money. Over a session of 3 hours, Picking up those small pots repeatedly adds up to a massive difference in your chip stack and your survival rate in a tournament. But fold equity gets even more powerful in bigger pots. Let's say you're on the turn with a flush draw. You have a hand like 9-10 of spades, and the board shows 2 spades along with a king and a queen. You have 9 outs to make your flush. Against an opponent who has top pair, you're about a 40% underdog to win the hand if you go to showdown. But what if you bet big? Now you have 2 ways to win. Either he folds and you take the pot immediately, or he calls and you might still hit your flush. The combination of these 2 winning scenarios, fold equity plus your draw equity, often makes betting here significantly more profitable than checking and hoping to hit. For experienced players, fold equity is especially available because you've built a patient, disciplined image at the table. When you bet, people take you seriously. Your image works for you. Players know that when you raise, you're rarely messing around. That means your fold equity percentage is often higher than average, which makes your aggressive plays more profitable than the same plays made by someone who has been re-raising every other hand. Here's a truth that GTO purists sometimes don't want to acknowledge. At the levels most people play, live cash games and local tournaments, playing theoretically balanced poker is not always the most profitable approach. What is most profitable is identifying exploitable weaknesses in your opponents and then systematically targeting those weaknesses. This is called exploitative play, and it's one of the most powerful skills you can develop as a live poker player. The loose player, what poker players often call a calling station, is the most common type of exploitable opponent you'll find at lower and mid-stakes games. A loose player has one defining characteristic. They call too much. They call pre-flop with weak hands. They call on the flop hoping to improve. They call on the turn with overcards or weak pairs. They are driven by curiosity, optimism, and a fundamental reluctance to fold. Against this player type, the correct adjustment is straightforward but requires discipline. You value bet more, you bluff less, and you keep your bet sizes large enough to extract maximum value. Sound simple? It is in theory. But in practice, most players mess this up because they get creative. They try to run bluffs against calling stations. They slow play strong hands trying to trap. Both of these are mistakes. Here's a hand that demonstrates the right approach. You're at a cash table. The loose player, let's call him Derek, has already called 3 streets with bottom pair twice in the last hour. He doesn't like to fold. You're in the big blind and you pick up pocket aces, the best starting hand in poker. Derek raises from middle position. 2 players call. You 3-bet to a significant size. Derek looks at his hand. He has king-jack, and he calls. The 2 other players fold. The flop comes ace, jack, 6. You have top set. Derek has middle pair. He checks. You bet 3/4 of the pot. He calls, because in his mind, middle pair with a good kicker is a strong hand. The turn brings a blank. You bet again, larger this time. He calls again. The river is another blank. You bet big. Derek agonizes. He's pot committed emotionally now. He calls. You show aces full. He shakes his head and mutters that he knew you had it. That hand worked because you bet every street with appropriate sizing, never slowed down, and trusted your read. The critical mistake many players make is checking back at some point out of fear that their bet won't be called. Against Derek, that fear is unfounded. Against Derek, the mistake is not betting big enough. Never bluff the calling station. Never slow play against them. Save your bluffs for the tight-thinking players who can actually fold a good hand. Against the loose player, your edge comes purely from being patient, getting strong hands, and then extracting every possible chip when those hands hit. There's a concept in poker called thin value betting, and it might be the skill that separates a break-even player from a genuinely profitable one more than almost anything else. Thin value betting means betting for value, expecting to be called by worse hands, in spots where your edge is not enormous. You don't have the nuts. You might not even have a great hand. But you have a hand that beats a meaningful portion of what your opponent would call with, and betting gets you paid. Most players value bet only when they're very confident they have the best hand. That's too tight. Think about it this way. If you only bet when you're 90% sure you're ahead, you're leaving money on the table every time you're ahead by a smaller margin, and check. The players who crush live poker are the ones who've learned to extract value in marginal spots, to see the opportunity where others see only risk. Here's a hand that shows this beautifully. You raise from early position with pocket queens. One player calls from the big blind. The flop comes, king, 9, 4. A scary board. That king is a problem. Your opponent checks. This is a spot where many players either check back with their queens or make a massive continuation bet. You bet 40% of the pot, a small probing bet designed to extract value if your opponent is on a draw or has a weaker pair. Your opponent calls. The turn brings a complete blank. Your opponent checks again. Now you have a clearer picture. He probably doesn't have a king. A king would likely have let out by now or check-raised the flop. He's probably got a medium pair or a draw. You bet 55% of the pot. He calls again. The river brings another blank. Your opponent checks one final time. Do you bet? Yes, and here's why. Your opponent's pattern, calling twice then checking the river, is consistent with a medium pair that is hoping to reach showdown cheaply. A hand like pocket 8s or 7s. He beats nothing you'd bet but loses to queens. You bet 50% of the pot on the river. He agonizes, calls, and shows pocket 8s. You show your queens and take the pot. That's thin value betting done right. It requires reading your opponent's range correctly, having the confidence to bet in spots that feel uncomfortable, and understanding that, in the long run, value betting those marginal spots is where profits actually compound. Every session, there are 5, 6, 7 spots like this. Players who recognize and bet them make significantly more than players who check them down out of fear of being wrong. The experienced player has a massive edge here, because thin value betting requires something very specific. The ability to make uncomfortable decisions when you're not certain you're right. That's a skill that comes from emotional maturity, from having been wrong before and survived it, from understanding that variance is part of the game and that making the correct play matters more than any individual result. One of the biggest challenges for players over 40 is time. You're not a college kid who can grind 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You have a career, a family, responsibilities, a life that is rightfully full, and because of that, you need to be extraordinarily smart about how you allocate your study time. The good news is that intentional, focused study is dramatically more effective than raw volume. The first principle is this: review your hands before you play, not instead of playing. Set aside 30 minutes before each session to look at 2 or 3 hands from your last session that you're unsure about. Not the big losing hands, those are often just variants. Find the hands where you made a decision that you're not sure was right. Ask yourself, at this decision point, what was my thinking? What alternatives did I have? And with what I know now, what should I have done? That kind of focused, honest self-review compounds faster than almost any other form of study. The second principle is to use a hand history journal. After each session, even just 10 minutes, write down 2 or 3 hands that you want to remember. Note the situation, what you did, what you think the right play was, and why. Over 3 months, you will have a personalized database of your own leaks and lessons. No training site will teach you as precisely as your own mistakes, honestly examined. The third principle is to choose one concept per week and go deep on it. Don't try to improve everything at once. That's how you improve nothing. Pick one concept. Let's say the squeeze play, after watching this video. And for 1 week, every session you play, you are actively looking for squeeze spots. You review squeeze hands after each session. You think about it at the table. You go narrow and deep. The next week, you pick another concept. The fourth principle is to watch high-quality poker analysis content, not just poker content. Watching hands is entertaining. Watching expert breakdown of hands is educational. When you watch a hand review, pause the video at each decision point and decide what you would do before hearing their analysis. This active engagement teaches you to think through poker decisions rather than simply absorbing conclusions passively. The player who studies with intention improves 10 times faster than the player who just plays 10 times more hands. And if your time is limited, that multiplier is everything. We need to talk about tilt, not in a vague motivational way, in a specific practical way that gives you actual tools. Because tilt, the state of emotional disruption that causes players to make decisions they know are wrong, costs more money than any single strategic leak, more than playing too many hands, more than bad bet sizing, more than misreading opponents. Tilt is poker's silent killer. Here's what tilt actually is, from a neuroscience perspective. It's a state where the emotional center of your brain starts overriding the rational decision-making center. Your brain enters a kind of threat response where the goal shifts from make the best play to recover my losses immediately. And in that state, you chase. You call bets you should fold. You bluff opponents who will never fold. You play hands you should never have entered. And you generally do the exact opposite of what a calm, rational version of yourself would do. Here's the key insight. Tilt is not a character flaw. It is a completely natural neurological response to perceived loss and injustice. The player who loses a huge pot with aces against pocket twos that hit a set on the river is experiencing a genuine neurological event. Their brain is flooded with stress hormones. Their judgment is genuinely impaired. The question is not whether you'll experience this. You will, we all do. But whether you have systems in place to deal with it before it destroys your session. System 1. The 20-minute rule. When you take a genuinely bad beat, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your jaw clench, do not play another hand for 20 minutes. Take a walk, get a drink, stand outside and breathe. 20 minutes. That's not weakness. That's neurological intelligence. Your stress hormones need time to clear. Give them time. System 2. The reset anchor. Before every session, you establish a specific thought or phrase that functions as a mental anchor, something you return to when things go badly. Some players use a simple reminder, make the right play, let the results follow. Others think about a specific moment when they played perfectly and lost, and they remind themselves that variance is part of the game and their job is the process, not the outcome. Build your anchor before you need it. You won't be able to build it in the middle of a bad beat. System 3. The stop-loss agreement. Before you sit down, decide your stop-loss, the maximum you'll lose in a single session, and commit to it like a contract. Not a suggestion. A contract. When you hit your stop-loss, you leave. No exceptions. No one more hand. This system protects you from your worst sessions becoming catastrophic. Daniel Negreanu, one of the greatest tournament players in history, has spoken extensively about his work with mental performance coaches to manage the emotional side of poker. Phil Ivey, arguably the most talented all-around player ever, is famous for his stone-cold emotional control under all circumstances. These are not accidents. They are the result of intentional systems built over years. You can build the same systems, and as an experienced player, you already have the emotional maturity to make them stick. Before we close, I want to bring it back to something important. The legends of this game are not all young men. They never were. Doyle Brunson played professional poker for over 50 years. He won the World Series of Poker main event in 1976 and 1977, and he was still sitting in high-stakes cash games in Las Vegas well into his 80s. He became the oldest World Poker Tour champion at 71 years old, 71, in a live tournament, against players from every generation. His book, Super System, first published in 1979, is still considered one of the most important texts in poker history, over 4 decades later. Doyle wasn't running solvers at 75. He was reading people. He was managing tables. He was using a lifetime of wisdom to extract information and chip up while younger players were still figuring out who they were at the table. Eric Seidel, a man who has been competing at the highest levels of poker since 1988, won his 10th WSOP bracelet at 64 years old in a super high roller event. His secret? Adaptability. He doesn't resist the evolution of the game. He studies. He adjusts. He incorporates what works and combines it with decades of live reading ability that no algorithm can replicate. Phil Ivey, often called the Tiger Woods of poker, won his most recent WSOP bracelet as a man well into his 40s. He continues to compete in the highest stakes games on earth, not because he's slowing down, but because the complete package he brings to a poker table, mathematical thinking, emotional control, opponent reading, situational awareness, is richer now than it has ever been. And in Brazil, players like Andre Akari have shown that poker excellence has no geographic or age boundary. Akari, one of the most respected ambassadors of the game in Latin America, has built a career at the highest international levels through a combination of technical excellence and the kind of emotional intelligence that takes years to fully develop. These names prove something important. Poker is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a lifelong pursuit of mastery. And mastery, Real mastery accumulates. It does not diminish. Now here's the honest truth. If you've made it this far in this video, you're not a casual player. You care about getting better. You're investing your time in learning, and that investment deserves the best possible resources. That's why I want to tell you about the Mind of a Grinder ebook collection. And I want to be straightforward with you about why it's different from everything else out there. These ebooks are not like reading a poker textbook. They're not theoretical overviews filled with concepts you'll need 3 months to apply. They were built specifically for players like you, players who have limited study time, who need to absorb what actually matters, and who want to apply it at the table in your very next session. They cut through all the noise and give you what really moves the needle, not because they summarize other people's ideas, but because they were written to make you think differently about the game permanently. No boring chapters, no academic language, no pages of theory that go nowhere. These ebooks were created to make you absorb what really matters and change your game intelligently, so you can go back to the table and actually destroy the competition. The complete Mind of a Grinder collection is available right now for $29.90. That is less than the cost of one bad bluff at a live table. And the knowledge inside can pay you back hundreds of times over. We're talking about advanced content, hand reading, exploit strategies, tournament concepts, cash game adjustments, presented in a way that's actually designed to be absorbed and applied, not just read and forgotten. We're running a launch promotion right now, and I genuinely don't know how long it stays active. These things close without warning. If you've been thinking about leveling up your game with real structured knowledge, the link is in the description. Check it out and see for yourself why players who've already gotten access are saying it changed how they see the game. Before I let you go, drop it in the comments right now. How old are you, and how long have you been playing poker? And do you truly believe that experience and wisdom can beat raw youth at the poker table? I read every comment. I love hearing from players at every level. If you found value in this video, share it with one poker friend who you think needs to hear this message today. One share from you might change how someone sees their own game, their own potential, their own future at the tables. Hit subscribe to Mind of a Grinder and come back, because we have a lot more where this came from. The real game begins when you decide to never stop learning. That's when the cards start to feel different in your hands. In poker, the real edge isn't youth. It's wisdom earned over time. See you at the tables.